I should say good day, because we know we've got a viewer in Australia and it's tomorrow morning there. So welcome. Anyway, it's very nice to have a couple of people who are tuning in to watch us again. It's a special event this time because, as I said, our guest is in Australia. So it's very early in his morning. So I was a bit kind to him. And instead of expecting him to get up and, be tickety-boo straight away, I had a meeting with him earlier today and recorded his part of the show. Now, Chris Atlee, our guest, is known as the atheist pastor. People ask me why. How can he call himself an atheist pastor? Well, I'll tell you. It's because, having been interested at some point in his teenage in the Christian religion, he was persuaded to join up to become a priest, and he studied. He did a couple of degrees, a couple of bachelor degrees. One, I think, was in theology, and I forget what the other one was in, but it was partly towards becoming a priest. Then he read the Bible. And just before he completed his finals, the last exams of his course, he became an atheist. Hence, atheist pastor. Now, the intention of today was to take apart a Answers in Genesis video by a performer who we've had visitors when we were allowed to work in a pub. And he's one of his videos, which I paid good money for this, Archeological Evidence for the Bible. So the intention was for me to play that. It's a DVD, and for Chris and I to analyze it from our respective points of view. He as a historian, me as an ex-science teacher. Unfortunately, it turned out that the video, the DVD, was copyright barred from being shown on our live streaming software. He came to the rescue and he bought for himself a version of this from Answers in Genesis, which came with permission for us to screen it. So I'm going to share my screen now and show you that event. Here we go. So, hello, Chris. How the devil are you?
I am absolutely fantastic, John. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm fine here too. You've got rid of all the fires and brimstones and floods and plagues of frogs and things down there, have you?
Yeah. The locusts didn't end up coming, so I'm proud to say I didn't end up converting to Christianity. but I fear that I might tonight after I see some sensational archaeological evidence.
Well, yes, I've got this DVD that cost me £9 of British money, which is a lot of dollars in Australia. And
that's dollars.
So I'm just about to stick it in my player, and then I'll share the screen, and we'll see what it looks like. This is the same guy whose presentation we pulled apart last time we met. So thank you, by the way, for coming back. You obviously are a victim for punishment or something.
I'm a glutton for punishment, but hey, we all have our thing.
Yeah. So it's loading, spinning up. Here it comes.
I think we have a winner.
We do. Yeah, sure.
We have a winner.
Look at that. We'll all go. Good. Play.
One of the things I love about the Bible, one of the many things I love about it, is that it's full of history. And there are two reasons why I love it for that. One is because it is not just ordinary history. It's full of God's history.
Made up history.
It tells us the history of the universe, planet Earth, the human race, what went wrong, how God plans
I didn't end up converting to Christianity. but I hear that I might tonight after I see some sensational archaeological evidence.
Well, yes, I've got this DVD that cost me £9 of British money, which is a lot of dollars in Australia. And
That's $1,000.
So I'm just about to stick it in my player, and then I'll share the screen, and we'll see what it looks like. This is the same guy whose presentation we pulled apart last time we met. So thank you, by the way, for coming back. You obviously are a victim for punishment or something.
I'm a glutton for punishment, but hey, we all have our thing.
Yeah. So it's loading, spinning up. Here it comes.
I think we have a winner.
We do. Yeah, sure.
We have a winner.
Look at that. We're all go. Good. Play.
You know, one of the things I love about the Bible, or one of the many things I love about it, is that it's full of history. And there are two reasons why I love it for that. One is because it is not just ordinary history. It's full of God's history.
Made up history.
It tells us the history of the universe, planet Earth, the human race, what went wrong, how God has planned to put it right, and then how He did put it right. I love it for that reason. The other reason I love it for being full of history is because there are so many people today who tell you the Bible is nonsense. You can't believe it. You're all familiar with that.
I'm very familiar with that one.
The fact that you can say the Bible is accurate history, and because it's full of history, you can check it out. And that's what we're going to do this evening.
This is history.
In checking it out, I'm going to be moving fast. So those of you who may want to take notes, you needn't bother to take notes, because I'll tell you how you can remember everything.
Yes. Isn't it teaches how to remember? Don't take notes.
Yes.
We're going to look at the subject of archaeology and the Bible. Archaeology. Well, that might be all right for some people like them, but for most people it's a term. Archaeology.
Speak for yourself, mate.
Yes.
Archaeology is rubbish. It really is. It's the study of durable rubbish that of previous generations and civilizations. When you send stuff in the trash can and it goes down to the landfill site in 300 years' time, that will be a treasure trove for archaeologists. They'll be digging it up to find out how you live and what you threw away. They'll love it.
Great, because I've got something I wanted to show you today. There's a recent news item was about, trying to find it. It was Australian researchers discover 2-million-year-old skull of human cousin that sheds light on evolution. Well, in some reports, that was described. Yes, here it is. Archaeologists exploring a cave system. Well,
is it the one in South Africa?
Yes, that's right. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, I think Homo habilis or something.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point. I don't think I can screen share two things.
No, so I'll drop this out and we can bring it back in.
Okay. Right, so I'm going to screen share this with you. Application window, here it is, share. Right. So, for a start, this is not archaeology, in my view. This is paleontology. Because, in a sense, he's right.
A bit of both, yeah.
Archaeology is the study of rubbish, is the remains of human society. And I'm not sure whether 2-million-year-old stuff counts, because we're getting now into non-Homo sapiens mode.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't have to go back too far to find non-Homo sapien, though. It's, I mean, you can go back potentially as recently as 15,000 years. From 15 to 20,000. I think there's still a little bit of conjecture, but Gibraltar's actually got the youngest Neanderthals, and not to mention that as Europe or as European descendants, we actually contain probably about 3 to 4% Neanderthal DNA in us, likely. So there is that connection, and even the Denisovians. There's traces of Denisovian DNA that's found throughout a lot of people, especially in Asia. And there's even potentially, I think they're talking about there's potentially a link between Denisovians and Indigenous Australians. That there is a concentration of Denisovian DNA, which would make sense because the Indigenous Australians would have passed through that area.
Yes. So
I feel like this name, Paranthropus robustus.
Yes.
You'd want to be called that.
Oh, well, probably named after the person who discovered it. Paranthropus robustus. Yeah.
Well, actually, there we go. It's Greek, close to an anthropos, meaning man. So close to man.
Yes.
And then robustus because of the
anthropos, man. Yeah. Well,
Latin. How can you go wrong?
So nomenclature is a subject all of itself, isn't it? Anyway, where's the difference? Where's the boundary between archaeology and paleontology, would you say?
I think once you're going back to, I think well beyond, I guess, probably pre-Homo erectus, I would say, or even the mitochondrial Eve. I guess there's multiple arguments for it. I think archaeology and paleontology do go hand in hand in a lot of cases. Obviously, it's the same skill set, just different outcomes. I guess that's probably the best way to put it.
Interesting.
I think I would apply archaeology to anything within reason that has to do with a human ancestor or a member of the human family. Obviously, if we're going back to the Jurassic or Cretaceous period, we would have had some ancestors running around. I wouldn't call that archaeology. I'd call that paleontology. I think certainly at the point where we start to stand up tall and look over the grassy plains of Africa to see when the cheetahs are coming to get us, I'd say that's probably a good starting point.
So there isn't a division then, is there? Because there's only a continuum of evolution from common ancestors through common ancestors up to...
What you've got to remember as well is our ancestors weren't, they did have culture. They certainly were more advanced than any of the animals that we see on Earth today, including other members of the ape family. But even apes, there's in Africa, there's argument or conjecture that chimpanzees actually might be starting to farm and starting to take that next step. Or even something to see.
Or even starting to worship. Did you read the article about the holy tree that the chimps gather around and leave stones at the base of?
Mm-hmm. So there is that cultural aspect as well. So you'll find things like cave paintings and markings and even signs of society, albeit extremely primitive ones. So I think that does put it into the archaeological subset. Yeah.
Okay. So this is something that people like Brian Edwards have a problem with, because he thinks that there was a first man and a first woman.
Well, I guess there was at some point. It's just when did that happen? When did that gradual evolution happen? I mean, it's
a case of how much grey counts as black.
Exactly. It's eventually it. Yeah.
So should we get back to him then?
I can't think of anything I'd rather do than watch old Brian Edwards here.
Here we go.
It's a good reason for chucking it in the landfill side. Archaeology in the Bible. Professor,
Donald Wiseman, who was, until he died a few years ago, was one of the finest archaeologists in the world. He was a worldwide Assyriologist. He said to me once, archaeology correctly understood always confirms the accuracy of the Bible.
No, well,
At some of those,
I don't like correctly understood.
that's, yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into a lot of things during this, but if anything, archaeology disproves the Bible, and obviously disproves the Bible, or even the lack of archaeological evidence for a number of the claims disproves the Bible. I have a bad feeling that they're going to do what I call the Spider-Man analogy, which is where they say, well, we have evidence that Jerusalem existed, therefore the Bible. We have evidence that Jericho existed, therefore the Bible.
Yes.
You know, we have evidence that New York exists, therefore Spider-Man.
Yes, yes.
You know, where do you draw that line? So some thought never existed. Well, hopefully they talk about Moses.
people and events that some people thought
Never existed.
Yeah.
We don't look at the lives of people and events that were dismissed. They were in the Bible, they were nowhere else, and therefore they didn't exist.
And that's kind of the point, though. They were in the Bible and they were nowhere else.
Yeah.
And especially within that region, there is so much archaeological evidence, there is so much history that we do have access to. That you've got all these other societies that seemingly existed around where the Jews supposedly were, and you know, with their big glorious empires. There's A, no evidence of it, and B, no one else around really spoke about it. It proves quite the opposite. I mean, if the Bible's true, well, then everyone just really didn't notice the big empires that were happening around them, and sometimes in the same place. So, or, you know, didn't notice that they were being defeated and driven off their land. So it is a bit concerning. That
The thing is that to be genuine history, you have to have multiple contemporary, independent, corroborating sources. And if he's only got the Bible, that doesn't meet that criterion.
No, it doesn't. And when you look at dating the Bible as well, the Bible was written whilst the Jews were both in Babylonian captivity and upon their return from Babylonian captivity. So we're talking around about the 5th century BCE, approximately 5th, 6th century BCE. So, I mean, even then going back the further 1,500 years, they would then have to go back to the time of Moses, or the extra 1,000 for the flood, or, you know, even before that. I mean, we're talking about an age where they only passed on oral traditions. You know, they weren't writing these things down. They certainly weren't, the Hebrews weren't the most advanced people in that region, or even a dominant power in that region by a long shot, throughout that period of history. There's even question as to whether they were in that region, or whether they've split off from other people. So anyway, we'll get back to it.
Yeah, I wanted to just finish off on the correctly understood expression that I took exception to, because that's a value judgment, isn't it? Who decides what's the correct understanding? And I bet it's him.
Oh, yeah, look, it's always someone with little to no historical knowledge, but who preaches a great sermon.
Yes. Roll it.
and we have to show how
Again and again and again, the experts got it wrong.
Oh, the experts got it wrong, but he got it right. That's good.
not quite at the beginning, but
Well,
very close to the beginning.
Experts are not above challenge.
No, very true. It's good to know that the experts got it wrong, but
Yeah.
Brian Edwards has it right.
They love an appeal to authority, don't they? This is a big man, so he must be right.
Of course. So I'm going to side with the experts as my default position here, but I'm happy for Brian to show me this evidence. Like, we could both convert to Christianity here on the spot. You do realise that?
Yes. Yes.
I can go back to regular pastor,
Yes.
and we'll call you Father John.
Yes. Yes. I've got an open mind. Just want evidence.
Absolutely.
the flood.
Now, most of you may know that a catastrophic flood is well embedded in the ancient traditions of nations right across the world, including.
There's an ancient tradition of Father Christmas well embedded as well. What does this mean?
Well, when I was a child, I remember the town I lived in, there was a flood there. Is that evidence as well?
There's not sufficient water on the planet to cover all the land. There never has been. And a global flood is out of the question, physically impossible.
And look, the areas that we're looking at, I mean, we're looking at, okay, so Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is a great example because around about 10,000 years ago, the land bridge disappeared. Is there oral traditions talking about a flood that divided? Yeah, absolutely, because we have the evidence that happened. There was a land bridge that connected New Guinea to Australia. Well, I mean, it's still there. It's just, you know, the sea level is around about 150 metres higher now than it was previously. You know, Hawaii, I mean, Hawaii is an island. I mean, you know, it's surrounded by water, you know, North America. But what I love is where they say there's all these flood legends. There's all, you know, the flood legends from here, flood legends from there, but they never actually provide the evidence. They never say, here's the flood legend from Alaska. Now, here's how where it's similar and what they say. So with the flood legend in the Bible is not the actual, it was stolen from the Epic of Gilgamesh, essentially. What they did was the early writers of the Bible, or the writers of the Bible, because they were trying to instill a sense of nationalistic pride in essentially a group of people who were Babylonian slaves about to go back to their traditional land that they'd been captured from. So all these stories that the region was familiar with, they took them and they made them their own. So instead of, you know, Noah, you know, it was Enkidu in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So they've just basically taken a story and copied it. It's, you know, copying something doesn't make it true.
No. And all these different locations, I'm sure it's highly likely that they did have floods, but were they all at the same time?
No. And even, I mean, you have a look at India, so that's the Indus River, and I think that's spoken about in the Bhagavad Gita, where the Indus River floods, but that's not a global flood. That's a regionalised and local flood. And we know there were large regionalised and local floods.
Didn't you have a flood in Australia last year?
We certainly did. The city I live in, half of it, well, not half of it, but there was, you know, parts of the CBD underwater.
Yes. And if you'd been unable to communicate or travel to other parts of the world, you might have thought that was global rather than local.
Exactly, especially when you're in such a small region. And look, I'll use the example of people in the 15th century in Europe. Most people who lived in the 15th century in Europe never travelled any more than 20 miles from their hometown throughout their entire life. In fact, you could go across the river to the next village, essentially, and find they had a different language, different culture, completely different traditions. We only started becoming more centralised with, I guess, the advent of cities and large gathering places. Now, the Middle East was probably a little bit more advanced when it came to having cities earlier, certainly when compared to Europe. But still, it doesn't... The people of that time just would have had no way of knowing what was outside around about a 50-mile radius, realistically.
Yeah. When your only method of travelling was on foot, you didn't go far.
No, exactly. So, you know, and we're talking about people who are in captivity, who weren't necessarily overly educated, although they were, you know, obviously the priests who are hoping to maintain power when they went back into the homeland, which is why, you know, you've always got to give this to the priest, and the priests want this animal sacrificed and this burnt offering. You know, they were pretty specific about what they liked, what they didn't like too. So, yeah, it's not realistic, and we have to look at this in a realistic manner. It's, you know, outside of any spiritual realms, because we haven't been presented the evidence of the spiritual, and we certainly, the evidence in this case of, I mean, look, as an atheist, I'm an active non-believer. I actively disbelieve. However, if we were to grant that there was a possibility that there was a deity, it most certainly would not be the God of Abraham, because the evidence would suggest completely otherwise.
And
which is just a trick of the devil, of course, but, you know. And
tradition is not evidence. I mean, there was a tradition of cannibalism. I believe that was in Papua, or was it in the Philippines? Right up until
there was in certain parts of Papua, yeah.
Right up until the 1960s, they were practicing cannibalism, and it was a tradition.
I don't think it went on that long. I think it was something that was stopped in the 19th century, but it was just one of those things that was used to, I guess, justify control of.
I can bring you up to speed there, because it was the anthropologists who the evidence came to our notice that they had what was it called, kudu, which is a brain disease similar to mad cow disease, where, you know, vesicles appear in the brain, holes appear in the brain, and the sufferer becomes, first of all, unsteady on his feet, and then worse and worse and worse until they die quite young. And that is a prion disease. And they worked out that it was being transmitted by feeding the dead to the family. In fact, they kept what was regarded as the tastiest bit, the brain, as a special treat for the children.
Okay, I'd have to. I wasn't aware of that.
This practice carried on after the connection had been discovered. It took another 20 years for them to realize and drop the actual tradition. Anyway, traditions are not evidence.
No, they're not.
That.
Definitely not. All right, back to Brian.
Like Alaska, China, Egypt, Guyana, Hawaii, India, Iran, Mexico, North America, Papua New Guinea, Peru, and Russia. In fact, with the exception of Antarctica, and you might work out why, every continent has flood ideas, traditions. Now, some of them are quite wacky, riding out the flood on the back of the turtle and things like that. But they are all recognizing,
or in a boat with two of every kind,
a long, long way away from the water. But we're going to go back to the ancient Near East and look at some that are closest in resemblance to the biblical record.
I just want to say, he said, some that are far away from the water, but I'm pretty sure every single one he brought up then has a coastline. I guess Iran doesn't have a huge coastline, but certainly Persia was in the same area, same region. So similar stories.
Here are two. Atrahasis that was mentioned earlier, and the Gilgamesh epic.
Gilgamesh! They copied it.
The Gilgamesh epic. Gilgamesh wants to get immortality, and he meets up with Utnapishtim. And Utnapishtim says, I was told by the god Ea that there was going to be a big flood on the land, and I had to build a big boat. I got the dimensions, and I built the big boat. He built his big 6-decker. He was told to bring representatives of the animal kingdom into the big boat. He was told to bring his family into the big boat, and he rode out a terrifying flood for 1 week. In fact, it was such a terrifying flood that even the gods, the lesser gods, were terrified by it and were afraid. And then eventually he sent out a dove, a raven, and a swallow, and in his case the raven didn't come back, so he knew it hit right out and he worshipped the gods.
Now, I just want to point out, the Epic of Gilgamesh was written around about 2000 BC, give or take, okay? The Old Testament of the Bible, that includes the story of Noah, was written around 500 BC.
Mm-hmm.
So one of these things is much older than the other. Do you think it could have been copied?
It's
And a story that they knew from the area. And he's saying it's Babylonian. It was actually Sumerian.
Yeah. It's a ripping yarn, and people like to think people love narrative, don't they? I mean, our very lives are a narrative. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So we love a good story, but unfortunately, narrative is not evidence.
No, not even close. And it's also interesting to note that the Babylonians, this was actually, or the Epic of Gilgamesh was actually something that integrated into their culture. Now, do we remember where the Jews who wrote the Old Testament were being held captive? Could it have been Babylon? What a coincidence. What a coincidence.
Today's Iraq.
Yes.
You can see immediately some similarities. Now that is encouraging, not discouraging, because it means that here is a legend of the flood, and where does it come from? It comes from the more sane version that you find in the biblical record.
The more sane.
There's a little quirk here, just passing on to you. Because in this case, we're told that the demigods that have been created to do all the work for Enlil, the main god, they down tools and went on strike. So they had to create the human race in order to do the work that the demigods refused to do. The trouble is, the human race made such a din on earth that it gave the gods a headache. And so they didn't bring a flood to wipe out the whole of the earth. That was the origin of the flood, the headache on the gods. Now, all of this is encouraging because it does at least cover that right close to the biblical origin of the flood, right there in the Mesopotamian area, where we have the record of a global flood, right over the whole planet.
We do not have that record.
The people were picking up the story as generation went on after generation, and it spread across the world. So when people tell you there are many stories of the flood, don't be fazed by that. Say, yep, I know that. And in fact, isn't that encouraging? Where do you think the idea comes from?
He's easily encouraged.
We don't forget, of course, that Jesus and the prophet Isaiah and the apostle Peter all believed in a global flood that was a fact of history.
Oh, well, if they believed, I mean...
Well, belief is not evidence either.
No. The only reference we have of Abraham is in the Bible. So he didn't exist. Now, to this day, we don't have any reference to our Abraham outside of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some interesting references.
Actually, he's mentioned in the Quran, but we won't talk about that.
The capital of the ancient Amorites. Now, the Amorites are mentioned around 78 times
this will be good.
throughout the Old Testament. They come in lists again and again and again. And they were generally enemies of the people of Israel, and they were one of the many tribes taken over when the people went into the promised land. And the Maori, the great capital of the Maoris, was discovered in 1935, and they discovered the 6-acre palace, 600 rooms on 2 levels. But much more important than that was the fact that there were some 20,000 clay tablets, like the one you're looking at, that came to light. And this told us a huge amount of the Ammonite people. Now, the Ammonite people were there, roughly speaking, at the time of Abraham. And we learned a lot about their culture. Professor Daniel Fleming, an expert in the Maori documents, has given us the understanding of so much of the culture of the Amorites that's revealed there. And the names that you find, names in their documents like Noah and Abraham and Laban and Jacob and Gad and Dan and Levi, many place names that are there, that are well known in the Bible. Now those names...
So names, I mean, that's like saying that, well, there's people who are called Joseph who live in America, therefore we know Joseph Smith existed, Mormonism's true.
Yes.
That's the same straw he's clutching at. I mean,
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
the names, of course, there were similar names in the area. I mean, it goes without saying.
Names have been copied down the eons in the same way that legends and traditions have. I'm called John. It's a biblical name.
My name's Christopher. It means one who carries Christ. I mean, where do you draw the line at the evidence? But the interesting thing is, okay, so they found 20,000 clay tablets, but none of them mention anything to do with the Hebrews or what was going on there. The so-called big enemy of the Amorites. I guarantee that's what we're about to get to.
And he's quoting a period which is 1800 BC, when, as you said, the Old Testament was written about 500 BC. But it's likely to have been copied.
Yes, yeah. They just basically took legends from here, there, and everywhere. But they would have known that the Amorites existed. I mean, they would have known who existed within the region. I mean, it's just like I know that, England exists. I know that, within my region there's New Zealand, there's Papua New Guinea, there's Indonesia. Just because I know they exist doesn't prove anything apart from I know they exist. I know that, it's once upon a time there was, the Athenians had an empire and there was Sparta. Once again, that doesn't prove that the Greek gods are true and accurate. It's just because those legends have been passed down.
Well, that's right. Yes, geographical locations are no evidence for events.
No, with 20,000 clay tablets, you would expect something. If this big Israelite nation was around at the time, and Abraham was this, great man and father of many nations, you would expect something. Even maybe a mention of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Wonder if they get a mention.
It's like your Spider-Man argument, or an alternative would be, there's a St. Pancras station in London, so that means Harry Potter must be true, because in the early books, that's how he did.
That Harry Potter isn't true?
Yes. I've been to St. Pancras station. They have a big sign up saying platform 9A, and there's a shop where you can buy wands and Harry Potter type memorabilia, and there's a trolley halfway into this brick wall where you can run at the wall like Harry did in the movie in order to get onto platform 9A. So it all must be true.
Must be. Has to be. It's the Bible tells us so.
Those people's names are not the same people as ours in the Bible, but it shows that those names are very familiar at that time, and the culture is very, very similar to the one that we know is revealed in the book of Genesis. In fact, let me tell you a little bit about the time of Abraham. If you think that Abraham and Sarah were really very primitive people, came from a very primitive society, then stop thinking like that and think again. You're looking at some correspondence, and let me tell you that from that time, there are thousands of little clay tablets like this. Yes, from 500 years before Abraham. When Sir Leonard Wooley dug up Ur of the Chaldees, all of it, a good bit of it, which was where Abraham started out in life, when he dug up rather...
Hang on, 500 years before the time of Abraham, wasn't there a big flood?
But so what? They wrote stuff. Okay, they had a writing. They were quite a developed community. But does this mean that what they wrote was true? No.
But the thing is, this is the supposed time that the supposed Abraham would have lived. But there's no mention of him. Look, you can go to Göbekli Tepe. Okay, it's 10,000 years old, or 10,000 BC. We're finding things there, but just because we find something from 10,000 years ago doesn't mean that the Greek gods were walking among men 10,000 years ago. Just because I think it's actually more striking, and it's amazing that he's using these things as evidence, because why is there no mention of the events of the Bible? They have all this correspondence, they have all these stories and interactions between these nations, but nothing that confirms the Bible. Just because you find something from around the same time that you think the Bible was written, it's not even remotely evidence. Not even remotely. You know, if I find something from if I find a newspaper from 1947, is that evidence that Roswell happened? Absolutely not. You know, it's the arguments he's making. It's actually hurting me to watch. It really is.
Roswell was the UFO thing.
Yeah, that's where the alien space craft was meant to have crashed. And they will claim that, but
just to clear up in case other people watching don't know.
Yes. Incidentally, I don't think the alien spacecraft crashed. I just want to get that on the record, even though we can find newspaper articles from 1947. So back to him.
In the 1920s, he discovered that 1 in 5 homes had writing material in them. He discovered that Abraham and Sarah could have lived in a 2-story house with a bedroom, reception room, kitchen, and some primitive plumbing as well. And we know now that these people were skilled in mathematics, they were skilled in quadratic equations, they were skilled in geometry and in algebra, and they knew, wait for it, they had a working knowledge of the theorem of Pythagoras 1,500 years before the Greek philosophers were even born. And you're looking at a right
here. None of that is mentioned in the Bible.
No.
On the left-hand side, you want to send a message. There are thousands of these, and there's many, many tens of thousands, I repeat, tens of thousands, in the museums of our world, the British Museum of those as well, they haven't yet been translated.
None confirming the Bible.
Yet. There are marriage contracts, there are property deals, there are rental things for property. This is the one you're looking at.
So what? You know, they were civilized, they got married, they had writings about marriage, and they had shopping lists, you know.
Exactly.
It means nothing.
In fact, the only ones who weren't civilized were the characters of the Bible who were willing to take their children onto an altar to sacrifice to a god. Yes. And took brave women like, you know, Hagar to have children because, you know, heaven forbid a man can't pass on his seed, you know. You know, we're talking, you know, look at Lot, who, you know, after the city is destroyed, you know, his daughters decide to jump on him. I mean, the non-civilized people exist in the Bible and the Bible only. This evidence actually shows that it is almost inconclusive that the two couldn't have existed at the same time.
I had a chat yesterday with somebody on Facebook Messenger, and he's proclaiming that because, what is it? Oh, they found some old nails which are purported to be from Jesus's cross. Well, old nails. I'm sure there are old nails. They were carpenters. They used nails, but what the believers don't understand is you need to provide a connection between common things like this bit of writing on this clay and the actual claims in the Bible that there was a crucifixion, that there was a Jesus character, that he walked on water, was born of a virgin, and then ascended up into heaven after he'd been resurrected. None of that is, they don't realize that there needs to be a connection. Exactly.
It's like me saying, this pen here, this pen, I believe, was actually the pen that the Apostle Paul used to write his letters to the Philippians. So therefore, we know that what he wrote was true, because I'm pretty sure this pen was the one he would have used.
Yes.
I mean, seriously. But the thing is, then use those same arguments, but use those same arguments and replace it with another religion.
Yes.
And they'll very quickly turn around and say to you, well, no, it doesn't work like that. Of course, it never works like that when they don't want it to.
No.
In a temple. And you simply write it on a piece of clay, back and front, you flip it over like this when you want to turn the page, with a little square end spatula, like a lollipop stick, you just punch it in.
There's a little dagger kind of writing. You put it inside the envelope, you slap the top over the top of it. Actually, the letter was put in when it was damp in this case, because it's come out in reverse on the back, and then you seal it round, stick a stamp, and you put it in the envelope and it's delivered. Well, maybe. But there are thousands of these, and there are orders for goods. There's trade going on all around the Mesopotamian area, the ancient Near East. There are goods for the orders. There are complaints of the delivery of wrong goods and inferior quality goods. 4,500 years ago, nothing changes. And all that in the time of Abraham. He came from a very, very sophisticated society. And God told him to go out in the desert, not knowing where he was going. He became known. Oh, by the way, if you go online and just Google in Abraham's camels, you'll come up with people that still tell you that the Bible is wrong, you see, because Abraham, we are told, had a great herd of cattle, of camels when he was in Egypt. And we know that camels were not domesticated 2000 BC. Well, really? That's because they don't do their homework. Now, here's the impression of a seal. There are different seals. There's the cylinder seal, which is a little bit thicker than your finger and carved around it, and then it's rolled over a piece of soft clay. It's like your ID card or your Visa card, if you like. Or there's the flat seal, which you carve on a piece of stone and you slap it on the seal. Now, this is the seal impression of a cylinder seal. And can you see, now look carefully, there are two, actually there are one that's come out twice, there are two humped camels with people sitting on them. Can you see that? Well, this may just help you a little bit to pick it up. Got it?
Incidentally, I don't know who's saying that camels weren't domesticated back then, because camels were domesticated around about 3,000.
Yes.
So I've changed
research too. Yes. It takes a long time. It takes thousands of years to domesticate an animal, and some animals can't be domesticated. Nobody's succeeded in domesticating the zebra, but the horse is a goer.
Yes. Oh dear. All right. So back to him.
All right. That may not be how you'll draw a camel. It's
Probably better than I would. But anyway, there are two humped camels. This is within a couple of hundred years of the time of Abraham. And that in archaeological terms is next door. So we know that camels were
next door,
were domesticated even before the time.
So this is something that I want to say, and something that gets lost in people see, 1600 and 1800 BC and think they were pretty close. They were 200 years apart. Now, if we look at it comparatively, what was the world like 200 years ago? I mean, 200 years ago, Australia was only just being colonised by British settlers. It had only been colonised for a few years. So I mean, the world was a completely different place, and it was very much the same, back in that era. So when he just said they're right next door, they're not. There's certainly similarities technologically. It's a slow scale of technology, but we're talking different people, different ideas, cultural evolution, wars that have been fought. It's less than 100 years ago. There was a great German, well, actually a bit over 100 years ago now, there was a great German empire that encompassed all the way up to Russia that no longer exists, and now there's parts of this nation and that nation. There's
but the pace of change has been increasing exponentially, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So back in that time, 1800 to 1600 BC, almost nothing was happening.
Well, no, things still were happening. I mean, empires still rose and fell. There was still. There mightn't have been technological progress on the scale, certainly nothing like we're seeing now. But there certainly was things happening. There was different ideas. There was philosophy was happening. I mean, if you have a comparative look, I mean, what's the difference in in time between Alexander the Great and the rise of Rome. I mean, there's not a long period of time. Well, when I say the rise of Rome is into the great empire that it became. There wasn't comparatively a huge period of time. A few hundred years is what we're talking there. So things were happening. It's just technologically not a lot, but certainly empires were rising and falling on a regular basis.
The idea that the narratives of Abraham and his family were invented during the time of the monarchy at the earliest is, according to Professor Kenneth Kitchen at Liverpool University in England, without a particle of supporting evidence. The culture of the time of Abraham is as revealed in the Bible, is exactly as we have it in the known records that have been left us at that time.
The records just show the opposite.
And one day we may well come up with his name.
Not if you interpret it correctly.
I'm not interpreting it correctly.
Yeah.
They were a very first people. They come up a lot in the Old Testament. In fact, Abraham bought a field to bury Sarah in from the Hittites. And you may also recall that one of David's generals was a Hittite, Uriah, Bathsheba's husband. And yet, because we only knew the Hittites from the Bible, and they were known nowhere else, they didn't exist. Remember looking at people and
that goes for all the Bible.
Let's talk about the Hittites. I'm glad he's brought up the Hittites, because if Abraham was around in 2000 BCE, that presents a problem when it comes to the Hittites, because the Hittites weren't around then. The Hittites were around about 1500 BCE. From about 1500 to about 11 or 1200 BCE. So the Hittites don't actually match up time-wise. So, problem.
Big problem.
Big problem. Look, only about a 400-year problem, but a problem nonetheless.
That didn't exist because they were only in the Bible. And then in 1906, in Turkey, modern-day Turkey, Ephesus, the capital of the Hittites, was discovered. It told us a huge amount about the palace. Was covered an area and covered a huge area, and there were many rooms in it. The Hittites are now well known. Some of you may have even seen programs. The BBC ran a program not long ago on the Hittites. They are very well known. Today, nobody doubts the Hittites. And more than that, not only was their ancient capital discovered in Turkey in 1906, but we now know that they fought a very famous battle, one of the most famous battles in the ancient world, the Battle of Kadesh in 1274. And it was against...
That's not 2000. That's not 2000.
The pharaohs of Egypt.
Only 800 up.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, that's what was happening 800 years ago in Europe.
It was a terrible battle. They fought themselves to a standstill, and they were going to resume it the next day, and then realised they'd all run out of steam, and they couldn't. So eventually it left to what is considered to be the first peace treaty, known peace treaty in the world. But of course, in the ancient world, when you fought a battle and you either lost or didn't win, you've got to go back home and make it look as though you really won. So when Ramesses II went back home to Egypt, he made it clear to everybody that he won, and he made this little temple for himself. And if I tell you that each one of the 4 figurines there is 60 feet high, you get an idea of what it's like to have a symbol. And if you go inside there, you're not allowed to take pictures inside, but if you go inside there, the walls are painted beautifully with this Ramesses II treading on all his enemy Hittites, the people that never existed because they were only in the Bible. Everybody believes in the Hittites today. Nobody does. That's the flood. That's Abraham. That's the Hittites. David, a legendary hero, you say? Surely not. Surely, yeah. Critics for many years claim that
David never existed. He was a legendary king. And in fact, what happened was simply this. Either in the time...
Historians don't claim he never existed. I just want to clarify this. What historians will say is that he most likely did exist, but he was most likely just a regional ruler, certainly not this great king that everyone had to, go and see for his, great poetic and military prowess. There's no evidence of the battles that were mentioned. He was probably a regional ruler at the time, and that's probably it, like the city-state of Jerusalem. So I just want to, because when they throw these, people said he never existed. No, that's not what's actually said. That's not the historical consensus.
Yeah, and the whole world was very much local and regional back then. The jumbo jet hadn't been invented. We've only had a global village recently.
Exactly. It's, you can't use modern standards in ancient times. I think that's an important thing to remember.
Time of Josiah, or even later, more likely in the time when the Jews were in exile, in the Persian exile, that would be after 539 BC. When they'd been taken into Persian exile, the Jewish scribes sat down and they wrote a history of Israel to bolster their morale while they were in the land of exile. And David was a great heroic king.
Exactly.
Just as an aside, can you think of a story of David if you were making him out to be a heroic king who wouldn't have included it? You've got it. All right. Anyway, they were dumb enough to put that story in, make that story up. And here's the great heroic king, because you see, there was no evidence of David anywhere outside.
You mean the story about how it's the king's right to take whichever woman he pleases? Yeah, of course. Yeah. What possible motivation could the soon-to-be rulers of a new nation have to include that story, I wonder? Let me think and get back to you on that one.
Well, that was until as recently, actually, as 1993, when the Tel Dan inscription was discovered. Discovered at a place called Dan in northern Israel, and it's the ruins of, and hence it was Tel Dan, because Tel is the Aramaic word for a ruin mound, like a big rubbish tip, really, trash tip. And Tel Dan produced this inscription. What is it? It's the King Hazael of Syria, who refers to the fact that he killed the king of Israel and the king of the house of David, the dynasty of David. Now, no one doubts that this is 796 BC. It has to be because of King Hazael of Syria, that's his date.
Incidentally, I love how carbon dating is a good thing when it comes to biblical evidence, not for the flood.
Yes. Well, they have a real problem with carbon dating, because they think that it can be applied to paleontology, and that therefore all of paleontology is wrong because the carbon dates are ridiculous, and therefore the Earth is only 6,000 years old, or some such nonsense. But the point is, the carbon isotope has too short a half-life to be useful in paleontology. It's useful in archaeology, but not in paleontology.
Yeah, and I guess to use their line, I guess carbon dating is very effective when interpreted correctly.
Yes, correctly understood.
Yes.
It fits perfectly what we know and where it's found, and so on. No one doubts that. But the very fact that he refers to the dynasty or the house of David is interesting, because it's only 175 years after David, but more to the point, 300 years before the legends of David were supposedly invented. No serious archaeologists today doubt the existence of David, because they say it wasn't quite as powerful as the Bible says he is. Although there's evidence to the contrary of that now.
Oh, good.
That's the story I'm trying to tell you.
Oh, he doesn't have time for the evidence. Damn it. I mean, he's 18 minutes. He's still got half an hour.
So you see, Abraham, we got the Hittites, we got David, and this guy's saga, we see he never lived, because his only reference to him was in one single verse in the Bible, Isaiah chapter 20, verse 1.
And Sargon was discovered in 1843 by a French archaeologist, Paul Emile Porter. And Paul Emile Porter discovered Sargon's fortress, this great fortress city on the banks of the Euphrates River. And this king is now one of the best known kings of the ancient world. He never existed, remember, but now he's one of the best known kings of the ancient world. His palace, his library, with his daughters, was a poetess and a prophetess as well. And this is the king who never lived, who actually guarded his palace with two huge 10-ton, 15 feet high human-headed winged bulls, which is really not bad for a king who never lived. And he's facing a guy who is almost certainly Sennacherib, his son. And we'll come back to him a little bit later on. There's a lot about Sennacherib.
I love how they make these claims and everyone says they never existed. And that's not what was said at all.
No, he's straw manning people here, isn't he?
Yeah, it's the claim was never he didn't exist. The claim was, well, we don't have any evidence of this person who was mentioned in one line and one verse in the Bible existing.
Yes.
I wonder what exists, especially when, you know.
Is he going on to talk about whether Moses existed or not? That will be interesting.
Oh, I can only hope so. So, hang on. So, Sargon, what's this? Defeat of Samaria in 722 BC. Oh, this is going to be a problem. This is going to be a problem. So let's just see what he says here, because this is actually going. If he's saying 722 BC, we've got a big problem.
Sargon, who defeated Samaria, that's up in the north, Israel. And in the year 722 BC, he destroyed the capitals of Israel and Samaria, and he took, and he tells us so, and the Bible tells us so, that he took a lot of the people, as all the ancient kings did, took them out of their land and scattered them in other countries that he had conquered, and then he brought people in from the other countries and settled them in Samaria. Now, when they came in, the Bible records quite clearly, the people brought in with them their false gods, and they stirred that into the worship of Yahweh, the true God. So the people in the north were people that had a totally mixed religion, and the people down in the south, in Judea, based on Jerusalem.
All right, he's got a big problem here. He's got a massive, massive problem here. So he's saying 722 BC. Was that what I saw? So the problem there is Sargon of, the Akkadian Empire. We're talking around about 2300 BC, 2400 BC is when that's been dated to. Now, there were legends of Sargon that were Assyrian legends that certainly date back to that time, but that was essentially like the Assyrian retelling of their history and the first king of the Akkadians. So that would be like me getting the Bible and saying, well, the Bible was written around about the 5th century or 6th century BC. They mention Adam and Eve, so therefore that's evidence that Adam and Eve were there in the 5th and 6th century BCE. So he's actually using complete bunk evidence there. That's not the actual Sargons. I mean, in this case, we've only got about a 1700-year problem. So compared to recent times, I mean, that'd be like me saying that Constantinople was just founded the other day. It doesn't add up.
Were not defeated by Sargon. They never actually liked the people in the north. The people based on Samaria, the Samaritans, were nasty foreigners to the people down in the south. And that went all the way on until the time of Jesus. So when you read John 4 and verse 9, and you're reminded that the Jews have no different people, Samaritans, I want you all to immediately think Sargon. We know where it started. It was his fault, 722 BC, when he conquered and defeated
2300 BC.
So there we have the flood, we have Abraham, we have Hittites, we have David, we have Sargon. What about this king who never existed, Belshazzar? Rembrandt, I don't know why he painted a picture of Belshazzar's feast, because Belshazzar only came in the book of Daniel and nowhere else in known history, so he didn't exist either. Figment of the writer's imagination. Is that all we can say about him? Well, it's even worse than that, you see, because the Bible implies that Belshazzar was the last king of Babylon when the Persians broke in 539 BC, and they broke into Babylon. It was a bloodless entry, actually, because people hated the king. But the problem is, we knew who the king was.
How would a painting done by a Dutchman in the 14th century be evidence for anything in the Old Testament?
I think the point he's going to try and get to is that this Belshazzar, who's mentioned in the Bible, did actually exist, and there's evidence for that. I would actually say that the Bible can be, in this case, used as evidence, because the Bible, we know, was written around this time. I have no problem with biblical accounts for this period, because even though you do take it with a grain of salt, and we expect that there's certain biases that will be in there that favour towards the Israelites. This is a contemporary. This is almost primary source evidence.
Well, fine, but I have a problem. I have a problem with citing a painting. I mean,
I think in their defence, they were just using that as an example. They were just for the image.
There are paintings of Humpty Dumpty.
It was real.
Well, it was actually Nabonidus. Here he is, worshipping three of his gods. The last king of Babylon was Nabonidus, and yet the Bible says that the king in Babylon at the time the Persians broke in 539 was Belshazzar. It's got to be wrong, hasn't it? Well, that was until the British consul in Basra, you all know where Basra is, actually discovered the remains of a temple that had been repaired and dedicated to the moon god. His name was Sin, but that's not our word Sin. That's just his name. And he had left 4 time capsules. Here's one of them. They're nowhere near as big as.
Just as a side note, the moon god grew up to become Allah.
Oh, right. Yes.
The Arab moon god who eventually became the god of Islam. So just as
you're not correctly understanding, I'm afraid.
I know I'm not correctly understanding. I need to correctly understand with the help of Ken Ham and his associates.
Yes.
There's only about that big, actually, little clay barrels. And it was 4 identical time capsules. And on it, he had a prayer for himself, of course. And he added, and Belshazzar, my firstborn, the offspring of my heart. So now, because we found Belshazzar on a lump of clay, we were allowed to believe him in the word of God in the Bible. But wait a moment. Then who's right and who's wrong? I thought we knew that Nabonidus was the last king.
He is straw manning this like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah.
Nabonidus had been away in Arabia fighting battles for the last 10 years, and he put his son Belshazzar on the throne as de facto king, and he was on the throne in Babylon, and he was having a walking time when, in fact, he saw that writing on the wall, and David and Daniel interpreted it for him, translated it for him, meaning the data of fasting had been weighed and balanced and found wanting, and that very night, the enemy broke in, and Belshazzar was killed. So actually, when Daniel was made 3rd ruler in the kingdom as a result of that, number 1, it was a very short-lived honor, and number 2, we now know why he's the 3rd ruler, because Nabonidus was number 1, Belshazzar was number 2, Daniel could only be number 3. Fits perfectly. Remember what we're doing? We're looking at some people and events that supposedly never existed. We've got Abraham, and we've got the Hittites, we've got Sargon,
Simon, we've got David, and we've got Belshazzar. What about this place, Nineveh, the magnificent capital of Syria in the time of Sennacherib, the king we've just been thinking about? The problem is, when the Babylonians destroyed it, they destroyed it so well that it just disappeared. So, where on earth?
Sorry, I had an important call from Fernando's school.
No, that's all right, not a problem at all. I was going to say, we're actually at the halfway point of the video. Should we make two-parter?
Yeah, I think probably so, because when I've edited this, it will still be about an hour.
Yeah,
and he does go on, doesn't he? What he's doing, it seems to me, is concocting. He's a very good performer, isn't he? I mean, he's doing all of this without any notes. He must have done it dozens of times before in order to be so fluent.
Well, the stories you make up are the easiest ones to remember.
Well, yeah. But what he's doing two things. He's not producing, to my mind, archaeological evidence for the Bible or for his God.
He's providing evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, what he's doing is saying that these people have made these claims of non-existence, and here's a piece of rock, or a clay tablet that says they're wrong. But that's not actually what he's doing. Is refuting some falsehood rather than providing positive evidence for his biblical claims.
But he's not being honest with what he's refuting. Like he's saying, people said that David didn't exist. No, no one said David didn't exist. What they said is, we don't actually have archaeological evidence from the time of David. But as we understand, as you go back to those periods, that doesn't mean people didn't exist. And certainly we can find evidence from around that suggests that he did. Now, did he have this big empire that was this big dominant force in the area? No, most likely not. And the reason that they give him this big empire is, once again, they're going back to claim their homeland. So they want this claim, the same thing that they do now. It's this is our ancestral home. Look, the Bible says so. It's the same thing that's happening now in the Middle East that happened, 2,500 years ago. And that's what they're doing. So for him, and even saying, Sargon, no one ever said Sargon didn't exist. What we said was, we don't have any evidence that he did exist. We're not saying, it's actually an agnostic point of view. And it's not dishonest to say we don't have any evidence that he existed. Now, you've got clues to find, but then he's using something from 722 BC as evidence of Sargon. But Sargon, I just looked it up actually. Sargon, where is he? Sargon was around, he ruled from 2334 to 2284 BC.
Oh, well, he obviously lived to as a spirit for another several hundred years.
But it's just picking at these little bits of evidence that he wants to pick at. It's whatever's convenient for his narrative. And look, I guess I'm at an advantage with this because I study history. I understand how these things work. Most of the people in his audience, they're there because they're Bible-believing Christians.
Yes.
They're just going to. It's like the wood duck. It's just always nodding their head, which is human nature. People want to. People want to buy in and find truth in what they believe.
Yes. He's playing the confirmation bias game.
Yeah, it's complete garbage, and this absolutely does not stand up to any historical. If he was one of my students, he wouldn't be getting a passing grade. I can assure you of that, because his evidence is bunk.
He's a populist, though, isn't he? I mean, he's telling the audience what they want to hear, so they're going to like him.
He's like a politician.
Yes.
Just not a good one.
Yes. We could do with some good ones.
Couldn't we? We're pretty lucky over here at the moment, but gosh, it's an interesting world we live in.
It is indeed. Well, thanks a bunch, atheist pastor Chris Atlee, because not only did you rescue the program because the DVD doesn't show and you solved that problem for us at no small expense, even if it was only Australian dollars.
Actually, it charged me US dollars, so I stuck it into me there, so that's okay.
Well, I will, if by any chance we do meet in the flesh, I will stand you a drink.
Sounds like a deal. Look forward to that. Look forward to that.
So many thanks. And as you suggested, sometime in the future, we'll pull apart the other half of his presentation.
Well, no doubt this one will be so popular, people will insist on a part two. So we'll organise it for the next week or so.
In the meantime, take the rest of the day off and have a good night.
Catch you all later.
Cheers. Bye-bye. What a lovely fellow, eh? I'm so pleased that he was able to help out today, and look forward to having him finish the show next time. And I'm sorry about the technical problems. What I'll do is I will edit the cock-ups out and put a shortened version out to be viewed by anybody who's missed it tomorrow. So thank you very much to anybody who's stuck with us all this time. And I'd like to announce that next week we have Professor Nicola Clayton. Now, she's a very interesting person because she's got a foot in two camps, in the arts world and the science world. She's a scientist by day doing sort of neuroscience. She's a bird brain nerd. And in the evenings, she works for the Ballet Rambert, helping out their psychological attitudes, I know not what. So she'll be fantastic to interview next week. I hope some of you will be able to join us then. I've got a special outro today, which turns into a montage of some of our best bits from previous shows. Bye-bye. Anthony, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Lee Cronin from Glasgow University. Hello, Lee.
Good evening, John. How's it going?
Dr. Susie Maidment. Hello, Susie.
Hi, John. How are you?
I'm fine. How the devil are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's very nice to meet you tonight.
Because they mysteriously became extinct, or did they?
Well,
My name is Dr. Mark Darcy. Hello, Mark.
Hello. Hello.
How the devil are you?
I'm good. I'm coping.
And my guest is Dr. Ed Morrison, and here he is.
Hello.
Ed, how the devil are you?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you. Thank you.
Member of the British Medical Association, and he moonlights as a magician. So he's a member of the Magic Circle as well. Richard Rawlins. Richard, welcome. How the devil are you?
Lovely to see you all.
He is a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Advisory Group on AI, Artificial Intelligence. And here he is, Blay Whitby.
Good evening.
How the devil are you? Sophie Scott, Professor of, tell me about it.
Cognitive neuroscience, and what that basically means is kind of like a kind of weaponized psychology.